And check 1 3 or something like that.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Or
Looks like we're live. Yeah.
now, it's just slow.
Okay.
Can you hear us out there? 3 people that are actually watching this. I hope you can. Now let's see if I can actually see the chat. Didn't I have it open a second ago? Well, I hope people can hear us while I figure out how to read the chat. Yeah, there's people that say hello, which I guess is something. Yeah, I'll just start and pretend that we're actually on and you can hear us, and then we'll see until I can actually read the chat. So welcome everybody to the usual monthly Marxist Malcontents, and my Malcontent today is Liam from Liam's Lyceum, whom you already know, I hope, and if not, you'll definitely go and subscribe to him because he's got a very interesting channel with a lot of old fantasy, unique fantasy, sword and sorcery stuff, and we'll have a bunch of good ideas to talk about today, I feel. So let's hope that this finally works. Because yeah, my computer is slow today, probably on summer leave or something. So Liam, welcome back again.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me. Yep, it does look like these people can hear us, or at least
Very
JCM
good.
says they hear you. So
I love those first moments when you're just like rambling and you have no idea whether people can actually hear you.
Yeah, right. It's always great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's good to be back. I'm enjoying I guess you could say a vacation. It's really more anxiety filled than it really should be. It's not really a vacation either. I just graduated actually on Wednesday.
Well,
So
congratulations for that.
yeah, thanks.
So what are you calling yourself now officially? Is it a bachelor's or a master's of art, master of writing?
It was just a bachelor's, it was BA. And so I had a 2-year degree, got an associate's in 2020, right when pandemic stuff hit. And so I took a little break from school for a little while. Thanks, John. And thanks, JCM. Or is that John? Is JCM John as well? Is that? I can't remember. Anyways. But yeah. So then I just got my bachelor's. I'm gonna go to graduate school and stuff too. But it's just a BA in humanities. So.
A BA in humanities. That's very good. Congratulations to that. Also, congratulations to 2 years of Liam's Lyceum on BookTube. I saw your video the other day.
Yeah.
And I know you don't drink, but I will. So cheers to 2 years of Liam's Lyceum, man.
Yes, cheers. I drink water. I mean, that's fine.
Maybe they should make water in the same kind of bottle so you can have the same effect just with drinking water. I mean, it's got, maybe you'd have to take the carbonated water so you have that effect.
Yeah, they might do carbonated water. I cannot stand carbonated water. That stuff doesn't taste good.
I think that's like a local thing because in Germany, that's like basically all you get. Like you have to ask for non-carbonated water.
Really?
Extra. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
We're weird about we're Germans. We're very weird about gas. I can tell you that.
Okay.
Also, yeah, welcome, John, Jeroen. Very good, Joe, Ben. Also cool. The Fantasy Thinker. Thanks for showing up, and sorry for being late. It's something I'm good at being late. I mean,
it's a talent. No, my we are always late with. I'm always really early, like as a person generally. Unless something really gets messed up, I'm generally way early to things. Like I'd always show up to class like right when the other class would get out, basically. And but my wife is always late to everything, and her whole family is. And so like I just kind of have to get used to being late to things generally now. So
I think like for me, it's like I'm really bad at timing in general. Also, I've spent so much time at universities, and usually you have that whole like I don't know. Do you have the like cum tempore or sans tempore kind of thing, where it says 10 o'clock on the schedule, but which means that you start at 10:15, because that's very much how German universities run. It's like it says 10 and it means you have to be there by 10:15, and usually stuff starts at like 10:20 or something.
Wow. No, we don't have that. That's interesting. Huh.
I think it's like one of those like old school European university traditions for some reason or other, which is why yes, it usually says like in schedule it says like the time, and then it either says CT for cum temporary, which means like with like the additional 15 minutes, or ST, which is the other one.
That's really interesting. I have not heard of that. No, we don't do that. So.
And I've very much adapted to that.
Huh.
So
whatever works.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of works. It's really bad when you have to catch a bus, though, being late.
Oh, well, yeah.
I've taken many a wound when I decided to run to catch a bus, and I should not run.
Oof.
Well, they are the scars of warfare against time itself, which, you know, sounds way more epic than it really is.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, it makes me think of just how we really only get time zones because of like trains and stuff. So, but it's great.
Yeah. So let's start looking at some stuff that we can talk about today. As I already said, you are very interested in like sword and sorcery and some classic fantasy stuff. It's one of the things that kind of sets your channel apart from a lot of people that mostly do you know, current releases, some self-published. I mean, you do a lot of self-pub stuff as well. And I want to talk to you about your writing as well at some point, but I feel it's interesting to start talking about that sword and sorcery stuff, because I finally got around to reading a book of blades, which you, thank you very much, gave me as a gift a while ago, and then I got distracted. After starting the book, I got distracted, and I finally got around to it. So I figured we'll talk a bit about that, and then we can move on to like general sword and sorcery things and your writing, and see where things go from there.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
So, like, how did you end up with sword and sorcery as one of your like sort of like as one of your foci? Hey, Britton, great to see you.
That's a good question. So well, it's right when I started my channel. I can't even remember what the heck finally like pushed me to start my channel right when I did, at least. Like, I had wanted to a few times before that, but right when I started my channel, I was reading, or I just started like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. And I was just about to get into Elric. I don't even think I'd read any Conan yet. So basically it was just kind of happening naturally, right? So I had read some Sword and Sorcery, not a ton. And I just found it interesting and different than compared to most of the fantasy I'd read. I generally read like epic fantasy and stuff, which is pretty normal. I feel like for a lot of people my age. And so I was just like, hey, this sword and sorcery stuff is not only entertaining, it's worthwhile. And also it's different. And my whole channel idea was just to be like, basically review and do stuff, talk about stuff that basically no one else was talking about, at least to an extent. You know what I mean? There's overlap, of course, even with your channel, right? To an extent. But like, I just do largely like short reviews for like a bunch of books that like, so I was just like, and I was reading a lot of Sword and Sorcery. So, yeah, I don't know. I like it. I like Sword and Sorcery. It speaks to me. So.
Yeah, Jeroen, I saw that Michael is doing the Cimmerian September. I don't know. It's September. It's still like 2 months ahead. I have no idea what will happen by then. Yeah, but like, so you said that. So how much Sword and Sorcery did you read before you started the channel, though?
It's kind of like, so it was largely scattered. I read Anthony Ryan's A Pilgrimage of Swords, which is very much a knockoff of Elric. I didn't know that at the time. That would have been in about 2019 or so. And then I'd read some D&D stuff. Like, I read a lot of Dungeons and Dragons fiction, and a lot of that's, not all of it, but a lot of it is close to Sword and Sorcery, if not quite Sword and Sorcery.
Yeah,
You could probably
which
better
makes
call it
sense because so
heroic.
much of D&D was inspired by Sword and Sorcery, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. So I know like right around the time I started my channel, I think I had read Saga of Old City by Gary Gygax, which
Ah,
is very Sword and Sorcery. I just read the second novel in that series, and that's very much epic fantasy, and it's not nearly as good. And but so yeah, and then I'd also like I would say you could maybe look at like the Erebus Kale stuff by Paulus Kemp.
hmm.
That's pretty close to Sword and Sorcery. His second series in the Erebus Kale books gets more into the epic stuff. It's always dark too. A lot of people call it dark fantasy, but
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
so,
So I guess we Joe or JCM Byrne, as we should probably call
mhm.
him. So go buy his books; they're really cool. Asked us for like a definition of Sword and Sorcery, and I think you recently did a really good one when we were talking on the Unabridged Burners, when you basically compared it to cosmic horror in a lot of ways, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a few short definitions that I've kind of like thrown out to people before. It depends on how short people want it to be, right? So, like in some ways, it's cosmic horror, but the protagonist gets a sword, um, and I mean, that's kind of what Sword and Sorcery is. Uh, it's generally very focused on one or a couple characters, um, so it's not very epic. It tends to be shorter rather than longer. Um, there's not even. I mean, there's novels. A lot of them are fix-up novels,
Yeah.
though. Um,
Yeah, I think that's
yeah,
like an
and even the
essential
FAF
part, is
novels are
that
shorter.
so much of Sword and Sorcery stems from that period when, from the pulp era, when you have short stories and novellas, and then you
Mhm.
fix them up to build them into like larger novels. I think that historical aspect is important. I feel another part that I find interesting is that in a way it is way more character focused than a lot of epic fantasy starts out with, and a lot of it does
Mhm.
have a
Yeah.
more like existentialist kind of vibe to it. Especially, obviously, you're Robert E. Howard, who's basically like Nietzsche in a loincloth, to put it mildly. But it does kind of these add to it because it's very character focused and focused on the fact that one or two individuals are able to actually do stuff. It does not necessarily look at like a larger world devouring threat or anything of the sort that like your epic fantasies do. It's more like individual adventures because, well, I mean, you have to have something for like next month's magazine. So it's just go somewhere, rob a tomb, and kill a demon.
Yeah, it's very focused. I mean, you could say,
Mhm.
right? I mean, like, um, but yeah, it definitely is tied into that short story market. That doesn't. I mean, it does exist to an extent today, but not as it was. So, heck, I don't know of anyone making a living writing Sword and Sorcery short stories. So,
Well, I mean, technically, Michael Moorcock is still alive and doing these
okay,
kind of
well.
things, right?
Yes, okay, that's true.
But then he's written so much other stuff as well, so I guess you can't just pin it on the Sword and Sorcery.
Yeah, it's
And
cool actually.
that,
I saw an image
yeah,
from if you remember Oliver when you were on for
yeah, yeah,
the Day of Might thing.
yeah.
He posted an image of the top part of the manuscript for his Michael Moorcock's newest Elric story.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
just the other day, so that's exciting.
Yeah, very much. I love the fact that he is still doing this at this point, and
Hmm.
you know, he wouldn't have to if he, it seems to be something he really likes to do, which I appreciate. But I feel
Hmm.
that that's one interesting aspect. Is like, why do you think that Sword and Sorcery, compared to some other forms of fantasy, has kind of stayed in what you might call the underground or slipped back into the underground compared to, say, epic fantasy or urban fantasy, all these other subgenres? Why do you think? What do you think why that is? Because Sword and Sorcery feels like something that happens on the fringes.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm not 100% sure, but I mean, like, Sword and Sorcery does tend to be, in some ways, angsty.
Mhm.
Um, it seems to often be connected to like, not always, but often connected to like blue collar type of stuff. And some people would say it's connected to masculinity. I mean, I'm not 100% into that, just saying that that's what it is. But at least with epic fantasy, I mean, epic fantasy starts like really forming. I mean, I would say really in other novels, at least the
Yeah.
ones that copy Tolkien, like in the 70s and 80s, right?
Yeah, your Ballantine Tolkien copycats, like Terry
Yeah,
Brooks and people like that.
right. And those are very different compared to. There's a lot of cheap knockoffs as well, though, right? So I mean, like
Yeah,
fantasy starts booming in the 60s. The more popular fantasy at the time is more like Sword and Sorcery or heroic fantasy rather than the epic fantasy. And so a lot of people write these very bad novels, and they get a bad association, right? It's just like It's just a barbarian in a loincloth type of thing, right? So. I mean, it gets a bad association because of stuff like that and some bad, probably Sword and Sorcery 80s movies. It's hard to guess. So.
Well, punching camels certainly made an impact in like 1980s sword and sorcery movies.
Well, it's very different, right? I mean, because to an extent, epic fantasy and Sword and Sorcery, they have largely, I mean, traditionally, I guess you could say, or at least for a couple decades there, probably in like the 80s and 90s, have very different themes.
Yeah,
Less so today, I would say. That's where this whole idea of grimdark, I feel like, comes from. Is when you have more Sword and Sorcery-esque ideas in them, or even like Malazan, which seems to take a lot of hints from Sword and Sorcery,
yeah.
even though it's very epic fantasy. And yeah, I don't know. It's very different. And nowadays a lot of people just don't read short stories. So
Yeah, yeah. Britain just said like Joe Abercrombie, my favorite author of all time. Look, I don't hate him that much. I kind of enjoy his books. But yeah, he certainly took something from Sword and Sorcery. I would say that it doesn't get the full feeling for me, because maybe I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, but I think there's two things that make Sword and Sorcery. One of those is sort of the trappings, the outside form, and that part Abercrombie definitely gets. But there's
yeah.
like a second layer to it, which is that underlying what you just called like angsty in a way. And I think that what I said, like Nietzsche with a loincloth, is sort of that underlying. There's a philosophy to Sword and Sorcery, and the nihilism of someone like Joe Abercrombie, or at least his words or his works. That nihilism does not. It goes down a different path, because your philosophy, your old school Sword and Sorcery is about doing stuff and just don't caring about the fact that life is meaningless. Whereas with the Abercrombie, it's like doing stuff and then being depressed because life is meaningless. And that depression is something that old school Sword and Sorcery authors kind of, that depression is something they turn on themselves most of the time, if we're completely honest, which Abercrombie's way might be healthier to the author.
Maybe. I mean, I've only read The Blade itself. And in The Blade
that is
itself,
more
to
like
me,
a Tolkien. That's more like a
yes.
reaction to Tolkien, I would say.
Yeah, I felt like The Blade itself, it felt very much like epic fantasy, but make it a little bit more modern and feel. And Sword and Sorcery always feels modern, and I mean like modern as in like modernist and like postmodern, I guess you could say. After, like, it feels kind of in the time and place. Epic fantasy feels very romantic.
Yeah.
Right. It is very traditional in that sense, and I like romantic literature.
Yeah.
So, but it also feels like kind of like, and to say that like romanticism does kind of have some following, I guess you could say, in the 20th century and today still, of course, for a reason, because you could look at the outlook of modernism, postmodernism, and be like, wow, that sucks. And so like I want something that's a little nicer, for whatever you want to call it, and there's a lot to explore there, of course. But Sword and Sorcery, I just like how it's like kind of in your face, and it's like, oh, problems, I'm gonna stab it. And so
yeah, I think so. There's something to it when you say like romantic, epic fantasy is romantic, and Sword and Sorcery is modern in that way. Sword and Sorcery has an urgency to it that romantic fantasy, like epic fantasy, because most of it is like tales of stuff that happened far away in a long time ago, sort of thing. That lacks that urgency. And I'm not saying that there's certainly tension and everything in epic fantasy, but it's less immediately applicable to to your own or the reader's situation, whereas Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse are doing something dumb, or Conan being stranded in a desert once again. There's an immediacy, like an urgency to it that I feel a lot of epic fantasy kind of lacks.
Mm-hmm.
To
Yeah.
me,
You might have it like something immediate in like a prologue, I feel like, for a lot of epic fantasy. And then after the prologue, it shortly connects to this huge epic world ending, or like at least their world's ending, like type of thing. It's not super personal generally. It's a lot of more, you'll get like in epic fantasy, this is where that trope comes from, where it's like the reluctant hero, right?
yeah.
Because of that. And it's like, oh, well, I don't really want to. Type of thing. In Sword and Sorcery, it's never really that. In Sword and Sorcery, it's more like I'm doing whatever the hell I want to. Like, so. Like...
Yeah, I think that's part of like that's the Nietzschean things. Like Sword and Sorcery heroes are way more assertive, which is why they don't fit into like the Joseph Campbell, a reluctant hero's journey kind of thing, because they usually don't start out as a hero's journey. They usually start out with being already out there, kicking hornets' nests left and right and doing dumb stuff in that way, which for me, that's an interesting question. Like, how do you feel about those two later sort of introductory novellas that Lieber wrote for Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse, so the Snow Women and the Unholy Grail? Because I feel because they do kind of start those, like, I don't want to say reluctant heroes on their heroes' journeys, but it feels tacked on, because that's it came later. It didn't start with that. It starts with the Jewels in the Forest, or Two-Sworded Adventure, which is very different.
Yeah, it is very different. I think the thing I like about those stories, they're definitely not my favorite, because I like the twain to be together, right?
Yeah.
But the thing I think that it does seem like kind of like a call to adventure, but at the same time, it's very different from most epic fantasy, because like Fafhrd, more like, this place sucks, let me get out of here, and so it's like, and it's not get out of here and go on this epic quest. It's I'm just gonna get out of here and screw this chick, basically.
It feels very much like you're more like your coming of age kind of high school small town guy who really wants to leave and go into the wide world, basically.
Yeah, and then the Grey Mousers is like a revenge story. Almost, it's very dark and sinister, and so it's just like, oh, great, torture. Yeah.
I find it interesting what Britain says, that like a lot of Sword and Sorcery is very corny, and I'm not sure if corny is the right word. Like, of course, some of the old stuff, that if you read your old Howard, some of Howard, or Lieber, is definitely can be seen as corny, but I don't think that is necessary for Sword and Sorcery if you take it and look at a Sword and Sorcery today, because you can transport it today, which is me trying to actually bring it back to talking about a collection of contemporary Sword and Sorcery stories, which is A Book of Blades by Rogues in the House.
Yeah, I have a copy. I have my copy rather right here. So
yeah, very good. Which is a lot of contemporary authors writing Sword and Sorcery. And what was interesting, like, would you say that there is a large difference? What makes these feel more modern or contemporary than older Sword and Sorcery in a way? Or would you say they are just like, they could have been published in Weird Tales?
Well, they read a little bit more like something written today. Even though I'd say like Lieber and Howard are largely accessible and entertaining, they do seem like they weren't written in 2023 or 2022 or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, A Book of Blades seems like, a modern indie authors.
So. I found it super fascinating that in one of the stories, the pillar of the City of the Screaming Pillars, that one of the characters calls the others guys, and I'm like, that's very modern. That would not happen that would not happen back in the days. Like, saying, "Hey guys,
what's up, guys?" Yeah, that's like, is that Bouillard's story?
Yeah, that's Cora Bouillard's story.
Yeah, that one was an interesting one, because that one seems very much like it's like a mix. To me, it seemed like taking a D&D party and putting him in Clark Ashton Smith's setting.
In a way, yes. I think it's so for me it was like you have those two, like the thief and the barbarian, which felt very Fafford and Grey Mouserish, with a lot, backstory, and they know each other, and one of them is always looking for treasure, and the other one's all like, oh god, he's come up with another dumb idea to find treasure. And the city in the desert kind of thing, it reminded me of a Robert E. Howard story. There's an Elbow Rock story, one of the few that does not take place in Afghanistan, which is where most of the Elbow Rock stuff happens, and is very much, I mean, I don't know if you've read the Elbow Rock stories. They're very, down to earth, and very little supernatural stuff. But there's one which is basically where he ends up in this like long lost desert city, and there's something sinister that happened back then, and he fights there. And it kind of reminded me from the whole setup, because it's like this city that people kind of know it kind of existed, but everyone is scared of it. And I just can't remember the name of the story for the moment, but it's in that Elbow Rock Desert Adventures collection of Robert E. Howard stories.
Oh yeah, I know there is one Conan story that's called Zuthal of the Dust or something like that.
Yeah, that's the one that has the really that has the lesbian bondage scene, right, with the Stygian woman whipping the Brethunian girl, because you knew that he just really wanted to have the cover spot for that one.
Yeah. Man, you got to do what you got to do to get the cover, okay? And apparently that's what you got to do.
Now, that's an interesting question, Jeroen. If most moderns, I assume you mean modern sword and sorcery, and not just old school sword and sorcery, being a reaction or direct reaction or answer to Conan.
I have thoughts. I mean, yes. It's both. No, it's I mean, when I talk to or see most sword and sorcery authors today, they love Howard. Okay, everyone will say he's racist or whatever, but they love his works. And you do have both though, because a lot of the corny sword and sorcery, right, are clonins. Okay, so they're like, I have to be like Conan type of thing, right? And
yeah, that opening story, right? That opening story in Book of Blades. I keep forgetting what it's called, but that one feels very much like sort of Conan copy, with the revenge plot when he just goes there and kills everyone, including himself, because fuck him, they killed his family.
Yeah,
that felt very Conan-esque.
Yeah, By the Sword, by John C. Hawking. I'm a big fan.
By the Sword. That's the one.
Yeah.
I mean, I enjoyed it, but it felt very Conan.
Yeah, it was very much. It seems like a very good bloody opening.
It works. It works perfectly. It's basically the Frost Giant's daughter, just with not as much of a happy end, because no one survives.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's funny because in my own writing, I tend to kill off my main character pretty easily. But yeah, it's also a lot of modern sword and sorcery though. I feel like it's both, right? Because you want Conan and Robert E. Howard in general, I guess. Just he has a lot of great stuff. And I like it, right? And most people who write sword and sorcery like Robert E. Howard's writing. You can always go against it, right? I mean, like Moorcock's Elric is like the classic example of going against. Oh, instead of this manly, beefy barbarian, he is the lord of this like decadent realm, and he's very effeminate and sickly. So I mean, like, that's like the opposite of Conan, right? To an extent. He's not really, in some sense, he's like not the master of his own fate. He is mastered by his fate, right? So I mean, like, and what's cool about that though is that they both work in sword and sorcery. And so,
but like one thing is though that, and I think that's at the core of it, is like, even though Elric is not the master of his fate in the way that Conan is an existentialist power fantasy, Elric is still trying to assert his fate constantly.
Yeah,
he's not, and I think that struggle is the important part that is at the core of sword and sorcery. So much is like the assertion, or the struggle to assert yourself versus fate.
Right. No, exactly. And for me, I think that's really easy to connect with. And I think a lot of people who write it connect with that as well. So I think a lot of people are reacting to and against Conan. They don't want to come off as a clonin in a lot of cases, right? But they also, I mean, it is sword and sorcery, so you can't ignore Robert E. Howard.
Yeah, I think it's like in a way like it's very difficult to write without in any way touching on Tolkien is a possibility in epic fantasy, or has been for a long time in a lot of ways, because it's just so huge. I think in a similar way, Conan is that embodiment of sword and sorcery. So people assume that you're aware of Conan, and even if you haven't read any Robert E. Howard, they'll compare your writing to it, whatever you do.
Right. He is the shadow of sword and sorcery that like Tolkien has over epic fantasy, essentially.
Yeah. I just love. Have you ever read that? There's this like really cool quote from Terry Pratchett about Tolkien, where it's like Tolkien is like Mount Fuji, the Fujiyama in Japanese postcards, because the only postcards you can get from Japan where it's not on there is when people are taking pictures when they're standing on the mountain. Now that has obviously changed, and it's like a quote from the 80s, but I think it very much encapsulates what's going on. It's like either you'll be compared to Tolkien, or you're basically copying Tolkien. Like,
yeah, which is a very interesting. It's so odd to me that like epic fantasy like had like such a thing, but I guess sword and sorcery did to an extent as well, but not at the same time. I mean, like I guess I haven't read like Donaldson yet, or even Le Guin, because I messed up. But you know, and they're kind of like around that same time, and they're not, I would say, probably in that shadow of Tolkien. And same thing with like Moore is pretty. Moore was contemporary, I believe, at the very end, at least with Robert E. Howard's life.
You mean C.L. Moore?
Yeah, C.L. Moore. So.
Yeah, she published in 36 in Weird Tales, so yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's contemporary.
Yeah, and then you have Clark Ashton Smith as well, whose his sword and sorcery is very different.
Jeroen just mentioned that like that. He thinks that, like, for example, Jack Vance's Dying Earth does also feel more Clark Ashton Smithy in a way, and it does.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. Smith is so unique because Smith has had like a huge impact, I feel, but one that people rarely identify with Clark Ashton Smith. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. No, yeah, Vance definitely. I think his Dying Earth setting for sure definitely seems to be inspired by Zothic, I think is what the Clark Ashton Smith. Yeah, okay.
That's the near the end of times, like the last continent, Dying Earth. It is a Dying Earth setting, is what we're saying here.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I haven't read enough of those. But I do.
They're fun.
The Dark Eidolon, I think, is probably the most well known of those.
Which one?
The Dark Eidolon.
Oh yeah. That's one of those. That's true. I think I personally I really enjoy when it comes to Clark Ashton Smith. I enjoy his Averoin, like pseudo French medieval adventures. I do like those. And his Hyperborea stories, because there's so much humor there in a way. You know, the door to Saturn with those two sorcerers, the sorcerer and the Inquisitor hunting.
Yeah,
that is so ridiculously funny.
Yeah, they're Smith is wild. I like honestly, even like Moorcock and Drugs doesn't approach Smith, I feel like. I mean, maybe he gets kind of close, but Smith is just like, he's just so out there. But yeah, his Hyperborea stuff, I think my favorite is probably his like the White Worm from the Hyperborea one, which is just like everything is freezing and there's this white worm that like I think he like chops off its head at the end, and then like an endless gush of like garbage like spews forth from it, and then he drowns in it.
Oh yeah. The one that I really love is is it just called the Seven Geezers?
Yeah.
That one is so ridiculously funny.
Yeah, that's yeah. I gotta reread that one.
It's just so much fun. And I think that's part of what makes Smith, Clark Ashton Smith, so fun, is that he's got the weirdness and he's got the horror and the macabre stuff, but there's always this like lens of irony or like self-awareness in there that everyone is basically at least gray morally, to put it mildly. They're all scoundrels, and they all know it.
Yeah.
And I think that does a lot for it.
Yeah, and you can definitely see that into Vance, going into Vance, starting in the
Oh yeah,
50s
yeah.
or whenever Vance started.
Kugel the Clever would totally work as a character in a Clark Ashton Smith story as well.
Gosh, yeah, I love Kugel so much. It's so funny seeing people like read Dying Earth and they're like they either bounce right off Kugel, they're like, nope, can't do that, or they love him. So they're like,
I love the self, like the lack of awareness that Kugel has, but you as the reader have it. It's like the entire, like, that evil wizard that sent me to the end of the earth. It's like, yeah, but you robbed his place. What do you expect? It's like,
yeah, man, Kugel is so
I do
dumb
really
sometimes.
love that part.
Yeah.
So another thing that, like, let's move back to that Book of Blades stuff, because I enjoyed it a lot. There's some stuff I really liked in there. There's this one story that I just can't remember oh, Wanna Bet. That one I really love because it has that the dynamics that the the buddy comedy aspect that people like Clark Ashton Smith somewhat in the some stories, but mostly Fritz Lieber with Pfaffer and Grey Mouser has like that that aspect with those two mercenaries that go and end up fighting the Hornet Queen versus the Spider Goddess kind of thing.
Oh yeah. Okay, now I'm remembering the story. Yeah, I was just looking at it.
I kind of liked that because it wasn't a very interesting way to include queerness in a way in Sword Sorcery, which, as you already mentioned, is a very angsty, very masculine, or has very much this like angsty masculine aspect to it. To include queerness in that in a fun way, which I appreciate, which I feel comes close to what you have with your people like Fritz Lieber, who does also have this aspect of having a more playful attitude towards sexuality, which is something you don't find in Conan, because Robert E. Howard is as incel as it gets in a lot of ways. But you know what I mean? There's like a layer of like playfulness with the sexuality that I think stories like that kind of add to Sword Sorcery, which works well. And I kind of appreciate like the dynamics before with like the slightly weird wizard and all of that stuff. That was fun. And that's some aspect where I felt like this is more modern, this is more contemporary, because it doesn't make it like a big thing that it like holds up in front of it as a story, but it's there and it's just normal.
Yeah, right. And that's a good point that I read this in November, by the way, guys. And so I'm trying to remember everything. Raph's got me beat. He just read it today, basically.
That's true.
Yeah, and you're right. And it's funny because Sword and Sorcery has always had a tendency to have like pretty open sexuality in stories. Even Howard it's always basically the same in Howard. He gets this woman, but and Lieber is very open sexually.
Yeah,
in everything he writes.
In a way that does come off very weird, like in a lot of ways. When you read like stuff like the last book, the Knight and Knave of Swords, you're like, all right, man.
Yeah. Yes.
This is skirting very close to some very uncomfortable aspects of age difference and whatnot.
Yeah, and it's almost erotica at times in the Knight and Knave of Swords. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, and let's not forget the Fafford ghoul sex.
Oh freak! Yeah, that was ghoul sex, and in that same book, like mouse sex.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, that's the Swords of Linkmar, I think. The one novel, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's the one that also has the weird part with the explorer that speaks German and is coming from the Time Zoo.
Yeah, that's
right.
Writing
the huge sea serpent.
What the heck is up? I don't know. Anyways.
Here's the funny thing though about that. When the explorer guy who speaks German talks about Hagenbeck's Time Zoo. Hagenbeck was a German explorer, like early 20th century, and the Hamburg Zoo is still today named after him. So there is Hagenbeck's Zoo in Germany.
Oh wow!
Have you been there?
I don't imagine there's a sea serpent there though.
No, but they had a really huge and famous walrus for like out of like 60 forever and ever. It was ancient at the end, and they had a huge walrus there.
Huh. What the? Okay, that's interesting.
But it's one of the things when I read that for the first time, the Swords of Lancome, I was like, did you just make like a Hamburg Zoo joke? Like, I guess you did.
Lyra's a funny guy. I can't get enough of Lyra. Every time I read one of his stories, it's like this doesn't sound that good, and I read it, I was like, wow, that was great. What the heck? So, anyway.
Yeah. I think because once again, what makes Lyra so fun is that there is a level of self-awareness, even in the really dirty stuff, where like, yeah, there's a level of self-awareness that someone like Howard does not have. Robert E. Howard does not have self-awareness. He's just got like lots of trauma and anger.
Yeah. Yes, he sure does.
Which I appreciate, which I think is why something like Conan does connect to so many people, is that it is emotionally raw in a way that a lot of other literature is not.
Yeah, for sure. It's very potent, you could say. But yeah, I think that is one thing. I guess I can't remember if it appears in any of the other stories, but yeah, I guess like sexuality is just kind of at this point in a lot of Sword and Sorcery actually is just kind of like given to be like queer and like okay sometimes. You know, not everything's queer, obviously, but like
No, but
like
yeah, it makes sense. I mean, a
mhm.
lot of it usually had just like your classic prostitution in the background kind of stuff, because you can't have Sword and Sorcery without some loose women standing around, because dudes get drunk and need to spend their money somewhere.
Yes. Exactly.
Which once again feels so incel-like, because those are like the fantasies of people who have never been to a strip club.
Yeah.
Which is why they write them into their fantasy stories.
Yeah, that's probably accurate. That's right. I can imagine. Oh man.
So here's another question. Like, you do write some stories from time to time, right?
Yeah.
You recently made a video where you explained where people can find your writings, but what I wanted to look at is like, or ask you some questions about is like, why do you write? Because, some people have a video series where they ask the questions like, why read? And I'm like, I want to pose the questions like, why write? Why do you write stories?
Why
What
write?
drives you?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a good question. So I always liked writing, or at least probably not always, obviously. But I mean, like for a long time, I've liked writing. I just like, I consumed a lot of media, and I think, hey, I have a story now, like type of thing after consuming media, and a lot of them would depend on based off like what I'd watch. Like if I go back to like what I wrote in fourth grade, it's probably like heavily tropey like anime type garbage. And because I watched a lot of anime when I was in fourth grade. Funnily enough, because I don't watch like any now. But
yeah. Wait a second. So Britain, I just really hope that comment on Veil of Lost Women was a joke, and because man, Veil of Lost Women is not very nuanced when it comes to race.
The Veils of Lost. In fact, I just read an article in the Dark Man like Pulp Studies journal.
Okay.
That's the chief editor's Jason Ray Carney, who I'm hoping to have on my channel soon. But he has a
Nice.
story in A Book of Blades, actually.
Yeah.
The article says it's the worst Conan story.
It is.
Like, so.
It's either that one or Shadows in Zembala, which I think
I've not read that one yet, but I hear things. So.
Yeah, it's one of those that never got published back in the day. Yeah. I'm not sure about Veil of Lost Women. I think
it's the same with Veils of Lost Women. It didn't get published.
Yeah, there's reasons. Shadows in Zembala has some very, very, very racist cannibalism aspects to it, which don't go there.
Yeah. But yes, anyways, I like to write largely, and it's not even so much the stories I have in my head, because like that is an aspect, and that aspect is often there more. It's often there, and I often don't write. If that makes sense. Like I often have a story and I won't write it. And so what basically encourages me to actually write, is emotion. Okay.
Yeah.
Just to be completely honest, it's whatever I'm feeling. And if the feeling is too much, I write because it's cathartic, essentially.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, like the first Sword and Sorcery story, like I really ever wrote, I was depressed as hell. I mean, like I was like, and it helped me a lot writing it. Or like the last story I wrote, I felt good. It's still a Sword and Sorcery story, and it's not a very happy story, but I was feeling really good. It was just midsummer, right? And I was at the park with my wife and daughters, and I was like, "My daughters are so beautiful," like type of thing. And they're
Yeah.
just running around, and I was like, and then so that like kind of kicked off like a story idea, because I felt like a very proud dad at that moment, type of thing.
Yeah.
So it's just whatever I have emotion, and if for some reason I feel like it's a good idea to get it out by writing, then I write. That's essentially it. I'm not as consistent as a lot of writers are. So
Yeah. Okay, just quickly, Britain. Yeah, okay, I get it. I get it. There was irony that did not come across in the chat, so in the written word. So I get it. You get the point that I wanted to make about Rail of Lust Women. Yes, it's racist as fuck.
yeah. Well, then what's interesting in that article actually is one of the things that it says that Veil of Lost Women
Yeah.
is probably why it didn't get published, is what the guy was saying, if I'm remembering correctly, is that it it breaks continuity
Yeah.
with like pre or antediluvianness, essentially. Like it makes two references to like Judeo-Christian like judgments and paradise, I think, are the two.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
There's something there.
and they don't fit into the story really. And in fact, the guy writing the article quotes from Tolkien's On Fairy Stories, right, where he's saying like that you lost it basically. And so
Yeah. Ha! Using Tolkien to beat up on Howard. That's
yeah.
that's good. No,
Yeah, my goodness.
I appreciate your what you said, like about writing writing as something cathartic to express your emotions. Because I'm always wondering, like nowadays, if you write fantasy right now, it's like, why do you do that?
Why fantasy?
Just like or writing in general, just like
Yeah.
people that go that start playing music nowadays. You don't
hmm
do that if you're playing like classic rock music in one way,
hmm
whatever way. You're not doing that to become a rock star, because at this point you will not be a rock star. The chances of you becoming a famous writer are non-existent in a way. So it's like it
Basically.
can't be the like I want to be famous aspect of starting to
Uh-huh.
write. So I'm always wondering, like, why do people start telling stories? What's the impulse that makes them tell stories?
Yeah, that's an interesting question actually, because I do talk. I have some friends, I could say, even
Mm.
in the publishing industry, in the writing industry,
Yeah,
and a lot of their advice is about making money. Because I mean that's a market. That's literally what a market is, right? So I mean, like, and
yeah,
it's to make money and to sell it. And I'm like, I want my stories to be sold to magazines, and not so much for the money, but so people can read my stories and see if I'm
yeah.
terrible or good or not. Whatever. You know what I mean? Like I'm not sure they'll enjoy them, but and so uh yeah, I mean Sword and Sorcery and short stories in and of itself, yeah, there's no chance in any of the hells that I could make a living. You know what I mean? If I went to a devil or the devil or whatever and said, "Hey, I'll sell my soul so I can get famous writing Sword and Sorcery," they'd be like, "Yeah, tough luck, buddy." So, that's not a worthwhile.
Yeah, but that's like another part. Do you think there's like a sense of freedom in writing Sword and Sorcery, because you don't even have to think about whether this will sell or not. There's
Mhm.
like the 20 guys that read Sword and Sorcery, they will love it, and the rest will not even hear about it.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because a lot of my Sword and Sorcery I feel like is kind of even out there for Sword and
Yeah.
Sorcery, and I'm just like I'm not even sure the Sword and Sorcery people will like this. Um, and I mean, I hope they would, right? And they do. And I found like ways to kind of get around the fact that like there's so few places that publish Sword and Sorcery. Um, that I'm
Mm.
just like I have a hard time even getting in with them. Um, and so
Yeah.
like for example there's a oh heck what the heck it's like a fan zine type of
Hmm.
thing that is getting started, and I put like a chunk of a short story in it, so you're like look, my story's getting published, people will now read it even though it's free and I don't get paid anything. So um
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know, it's just um it's it's what I want to write, if that makes sense. I mean, like, and hopefully people would enjoy that. But if they don't enjoy it, it's the same thing with my channel. Like, I don't feed the algorithm literally at all. Like, at
Yeah.
all. Like, I will, in some ways, I feel like, oh, if I did this, I'd know I'd get more views or more subscribers. Well, I'm not going to do that. So, that was a nice thought.
Yeah.
And like, even on Monday, I had a review come out on Monday, and someone said, oh, you should put Malazan in the title. I was like, yeah, I thought about that, but I decided against it. So no thanks. And I was like, yeah, I'm sure that would get me more views, but I mean, like, the title is House of Chains. It's got, and like, I put Steven Erickson at least in the description, because I don't even put the authors in my titles. Like, I'm just like, good luck finding whatever the hell I'm talking about. Like, so I mean,
that was because I was just wondering which one you're talking about, because I also saw that you published the Midnight Tides video already, review.
yeah,
already.
yeah. That those, I moved those up because I do my reviews in like order normally, the order I read them in, unless they were like arcs. I try to get those out sooner, because I'm 4 months behind. So all my reviews that come out I read 4 months ago generally, and so I wanted to have, I read Leiber's Night of the Long Knives, and I wanted that to come out the same day as Night of Knives. And so I was like, oh crap, I got to push House of Chains and Midnight Tides up real quick. So Monday I have Night of Knives and Night of the Long Knives coming out on the same day. But
that's funny.
Yeah. So, but yeah. So but yeah, it's the same thing. Like, I was like, okay, yeah, I could do this and get money. You know what I mean? Or like, I could do this and get subscribers, like on YouTube or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like doing that. I feel like a sellout. You know what I mean? Like, to be completely honest, it feels dishonest, even if it's something stupid like that. Okay. Like, I was like, I don't want to do anything besides what it actually is. And what is this? It's a review for House of Chains. I'm not going to say mind blowing or whatever. Like, and as I realize it's not popular to put a review for the 4th book in a series and have it be spoiler free, but all my reviews are spoiler free unless they came out 1,000 years ago. So, I mean, like, and so I'm just like, I'm not going to change it now. If someone wants to have me on their channel,
spoiler-free review of Gilgamesh once.
Oh, okay, okay. Jeez, you're really saving us there, Raph. You're doing the good work. Saving some spoilers for Gilgamesh.
Well, so about that House of Chains, though, since we're still talking Sword and Sorcery, you've read the Problem of Karsa Orlong, I know. I think you did, because I remember you mentioning it somewhere.
Yeah, I did. It's been, I read it like right when I read House of Chains, though, so it's been like 4 months ago. But
I just thought, like, what are your thoughts on Karsa as a response to Conan, or and still not being Sword and Sorcery, but like, what your thoughts on that idea are in a way?
I like Karsa a lot. I mean, he's funny because I just finished the Bone Hunters, actually. And like, you get like Karsa at the beginning of House of Chains, and you're like, okay, this guy is a ding dong, lightly, I guess, if you want to put it lightly, and and at the end, though, you are like, wow, Karsa, you redeemed yourself, like, by brutalizing
wrestling dinosaurs knee deep in shit.
Yeah, so I mean, like, and so it's like, that was cool, and of course you don't get him in Midnight Tides, but and then in Bone Hunters, you're reminded that he's still a ding dong. I mean, at least he's still like an awesome ding dong, if you would. You know what I mean? Like, he's still really powerful. He's got this cool sword, but like, he's still a doofus. I mean, at times, and so it's just like, and I was like, that's cool, because Conan in himself is like, Conan's pretty cunning, you know what I mean? And he's not, I wouldn't say unintelligent, right? But he's still like, he's very much Conan. Conan is Conan,
Yeah.
And he's never not Conan. He's not even Cole. So I mean, he's not. And so I like Karsa. I like the fact, he's I mean, you can say he's a deconstruction of like this barbarian Sword and Sorcery type of guy.
Yeah.
But he's an interesting character, faults and all, right? I mean, Karsa is not a hero. I don't think Karsa thinks he's a hero. I mean, maybe he does at the beginning of House of Chains. But at least now he doesn't, right? And so
no.
but doesn't mean he's not dumb. You know, it's similar with like Fafnir and Grey Mouse, where they're like they are dumb at times, and I think they realize they are dumb at times.
Yeah.
They're like, wow, he just got played. I'm not going to talk about it. So they're like
the greatest feats of Lankmar.
yeah, that's exactly. Yeah.
But I think that's what I meant when I said that there's like a level of self-awareness with Lieber that is not necessarily there with Howard in that regard. It's like Fafnir and the Grey Mouse do dumb things. They are very relatable for people like me, where I'm like, yeah, I've certainly done things that Fafnir would do. I've certainly done things that the Mouser would do. I get it, but I'm also aware that it was dumb then and it's dumb now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so that I mean, I like Karst's arc, the fact, at least in House of Chains, right, that he comes to realize he's like, oh,
yeah,
wait a second. The world is not the way I think it is.
He gets an imperial reality check, to put it mildly.
Yeah, right, yeah. Right, and I like that. I mean, like, and I'm sure, I mean, I don't know, you know a lot more about Erickson than I do, but I imagine Erickson likes Conan. I mean, if I were to just guess. So,
oh yeah, he's is it like when he talks about like how Tolkien did not actually influence Malazan because he didn't read it at the time. He always mentions Conan and Black Company and I think Clark Ashton Smith or Fritz Lieber, one of those. But those are the influences. So he's aware of Conan. He loves Conan.
Yeah. See, that doesn't surprise me. So and I like that, right? Because he's messing with this Conan character, but it's not like you'll see a lot of people, they'll deconstruct something and they're just assholes about it. I don't curse much, but I mean, like, and they're just, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, you obviously don't like Conan, you know, or something like that. It's not like that at all, right? So it's just like, it's very much, this guy likes Conan, you know, so it's good. I don't know.
I think that's
charitable,
that's like
I guess you could
say.
Yeah,
that's at the heart of good parody, good satire, and good deconstruction is that you have an understanding and possibly a love of the thing that you're deconstructing, because it's easy to just like hate on Conan. It's very easy to do that. But that's not good deconstruction, because you need to understand what makes Conan tick and what makes Conan work. You know, going out, it's like, yeah, well, Conan is this sexist barbarian that just kills everyone and gets the blonde girl at the end. It's like, yeah, no shit, but that's not why it works. That's not even why it worked back then, and that's probably not even what made it work for Robert E. Howard himself. That's not the point.
Yeah, you're right.
I think that's part of what makes, you know, Karsta work, is that it's written by someone who actually understands how Conan works and why Conan works.
Yeah. And Joe has this comment, says you got to have some appreciation for a genre to deconstruct it well, and I think that's true. Heck, not even to deconstruct it, but just write it well. I mean, like, not even if you're trying to deconstruct it, but like, you have like a lot of people who write like epic fantasy and they don't know epic fantasy, and you can tell.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's like you have to appreciate something to go at it, or to make fun of it. Even then, it's like, there has to be love there somewhere. It probably is a very you know, nuanced love in a way. When you're aware of the faults of the thing you love, but you still love it. And that's where like good deconstruction kind of starts, I think. So you write out of passion and to sort of express your feelings more than story than just write plots. Or has it ever happened for you that you have like a cool plot idea in your brain? You're just like, yeah, I got to write this very specific story, or is it usually just okay?
Yeah. So actually, the story that came out in the Half Human Heroes anthology, that one was a different one for me, because I had the idea for the story first, right? And then I was reading Robert E. Howard, surprise, and and I
happens to all of us all the time.
Right, and then I was like, oh wait, this would work so well. Basically, so like I don't know if you watched my story, like my I think I put out a video rather of like what influenced my story. There's a bunch of stuff that influenced it. Some stuff I didn't even mention, and some stuff I'm sure I'm forgetting even now. But the main idea was, okay, I had this story, I don't know how to tell the story because I just find it boring to just tell stories unless there's something odd going on or something that I think is fun. Right, or unless the emotion just forces it all out of me, right? I mean, like for example, like the character I write the most about is a guy named Arian, and that guy is nuts. You know what I mean? But I don't let you really inside his head. I want you to know he's nuts from all the actions he does, and no publisher likes that apparently. Just so you all know, a publisher, at least these days, wants your characters to have motivations that they can see on the page. And I was like, well, you can, you know, you just gotta pay attention better. And so. Which is why no Aryan stories are published. One did get bought though. Actually, it's just still not published. But in this story, I was like, okay, I want to just tell this really simple story, right, of this like town that's like messed up for some reason, essentially. And this my main character Renata going there and solving the problem, right? But I was like, that sounds boring to me. Like that's lame. Come on, it's probably thousands of stories. But I was like, oh wait, I had just read Curse of the Golden Skull. Okay, it's a Cole story.
Oh, that one.
It's really short. It's really short. I'm not sure it was published. I'm sure it wasn't published actually when he was alive.
No, I think it's in that Del Rey called Exile of Atlantis. Seriously, if you want Robert E. Howard books, get those Del Rey books. They're really good.
Yeah, right. No, for sure. And that's what I get. And then so in this story, Cole is essentially I don't even think it's Cole actually. It's someone is in like a temple or something and they touch something and then they die. Okay, but they don't die quickly. They sit there and they're dying slowly. And they're just
and Cole shows up at the end.
Yeah, and Cole shows up at the end. Yeah. So and I was like, I can do this. And so I have a story where so I was like, I can take that idea and I can mix it with another idea that I kind of had before, which was The Sadness of the Executioner by Fritz Leiber. I was like, I'm going to take that plot, mix it with the
Curse of the Golden
Skull. So, so The Sadness of the Executioner is counting down 20 seconds, death filling a quota, right, type of thing. And then I was like, the Curse of the Golden Skull, I was like, oh, sweet, I can just do this. So, and not just someone dying there for like a page or two, I think is what the Curse of the Golden Skull is really short. I was like, I'll just have them counting down their death. The first sentence is, I had 5 seconds to live. And the reason she knows she has 5 seconds is because she's died a lot. She's immortal, essentially, right? So like she dies, but she gets reborn into a new body.
Okay.
So like she's like, I had 5 seconds to live, and then so she recounts like kind of how the start of this new life happened. She's like, oh look, I'm a woman again, because she gets like resurrected into a bunch of different bodies. They're not all female, and so she's just like kind of slowly like 4 seconds. Okay, this is kind of what happened next, type of thing. It's really short. It's like 2,700 words rather.
Really short, 2,700 pages. You just like my buddy Brandon usually writes his short.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Lyceum, first of all, hey, welcome. Glad you made it. Top 10 videos. There's like one big reason why I don't make those, and that's I'm really bad at making lists. I really hate ranking stuff. I can tell you about all the books I love and stuff, but you force me to make like a list, and I'll just like stop and stare at the wall for the next month and do nothing. Which is a shame, because I'm aware of the fact that top 10 lists do really well on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just like, top 10 fantasy series. And then then I stare at the wall and have to decide whether it's Discworld or Black Company first. And then someone walks in like, have you thought about Tolkien? And I'm like, oh shit. The problem just gets worse and worse and worse. And I'm circling and circling.
Yeah. But then you can deconstruct the top 10 list, Raph. It's like Brian Lee Durfee's like, I have a top 10, it's like 26. And I'm just like, if I were to do a top 10, because I don't do them either, right? I'd be like, I'd have a 0 probably, and I might have ones that tie, like, and I'd probably have more than 10 anyways. So yeah.
Yeah, Joe. I might break your heart if I make a top 10 list. But as I said, I won't even get to like a top 3 because I can't even begin to think about like what would be number 1. It's like, and then I'm like, all right, so I'll take Black Company because it's an actual series, and Discworld is just a shared world. They're not actually series, right? And then I can sort of lawyer my way through the whole thing.
Oh man.
I'm just really bad at ranking stuff, which, you know, art shouldn't be ranked because that's not how it works.
Yeah, I've fallen out of the this is my favorites, or like, I mean, maybe sometimes I do have a favorite, I guess, but like generally the more I consume, the more it's more of like I have a lot of favorites or something like that. So
yeah, John, that might work. Rolling a d20 might actually work.
I mean,
Also, I
one
get to
way go
blame
about it.
something else than my my abominable taste when I do that.
Yes, chance.
Yeah. So we talked about your writing. So I know you made the video, and people should definitely watch that. But where can people find your your writing, Liam?
So if you want like all of it basically in one place, if you just go to liamqdhall.com, that's my website since I have one of those. I guess I'm cool now. My dad
Awesome.
is a like a computer programmer. He made the website for me, so it was easy to do that. So yeah, that's where almost all of it's free. Actually, I can say that too. It's almost all online stuff. So I do have a Patreon. That stuff is linked on my website as well. There's probably just a couple stories on my Patreon that you're technically like need to be subscribed to read, but even like half of those I think are free. So yeah.
Are you constantly working on stories, or is it more like you have this idea and then you write the story and then you move on, or is it more like you have like a couple of unfinished ones that you go back to and try to figure out?
That's a good question. I have I have a lot of unfinished ones. I often don't get back to them ever, at least so far. And so like I'll look at them sometimes like, I don't know. Often I find that I write a lot of my stories really quickly. Like I'll write them in just a couple settings, basically till they're done,
Mhm.
essentially. And so I don't write as consistently as I should. There are times where I am more consistent. So like beginning of this year, I was pretty consistent. So late last year, I was pretty
Mhm.
consistent, writing a decent amount of stories every month or whatever. So one thing that does, especially when I'm not feeling super motivated,
Mhm.
again by emotion or whatever it is, rejections from magazines do hurt me. So like they don't, physically hurt me, obviously, right? But like they are not encouraging. And it's like, oh, great, it's been rejected from like basically every place that would possibly accept it. So I guess it's done for, like type of thing. So, yeah. Or like,
Yeah.
there's sometimes where I'm like, oh, I'm sure this will get accepted for publication, and then it doesn't. I'm like, well, okay, never mind, I guess. Like, so those kind of bum me out. I got one rejection earlier this year, which made me so mad. And I shouldn't have been mad. My anger was like a symptom of my disappointment, right? But it was just like I wrote this story like for this magazine for once, which I don't normally do. And then I got rejected for like a really silly reason, or at least something I felt like was really silly. I was like, huh, okay, well.
Yeah. So Joe asks if Conan was Marxist. I would say he certainly thought with hammer and sickle if he could lay his hands on it. Well, that's something actually I thought about like earlier because when Liam like earlier I meant before the before the actual live stream. So here's a theory. Like obviously, you said earlier that there is a cosmic horror level to sword and sorcery, and I agree with that. And I'm always wondering, like, why cosmic horror as the thing that say people like Lovecraft and so forth kind of started is a very 20th century approach to horror because it's this uncaring universe kind of grinds you down. You stand
Mhm.
up against it or you don't, depending on what story you're reading. And I think part of why it works so well as horror of the 20th century is that we've reached a point where the systems that we live under have shown themselves as, well, being abstract systems, hard to understand, and very uncaring. So I think there is a level of Conan or other sword and sorcery heroes going up against the cosmic horror, the uncaring universe out there, that you could probably interpret in a Marxist way if you wanted to.
Yeah, I'm sure you could. That's the cool thing about like critiques or criticisms or stuff is like you can make anything feminist, for example. I mean, so like and I'm sure there's a solid thing there for like a Marxist interpretation. It's funny because I actually see a lot of what's cool, I think, about Sword and Sorcery. I think it's cool, at least, as I see a lot of left-leaning people who write it and like it, and I see a lot of right-leaning people. Now, I think the left and right dichotomy kind of sucks, personally, but I can say, like, I see a lot of more like, I guess you could say,
Did you
like,
read that, JCM? Like, make the Gore series feminist.
oh, okay, no. I will not accept that challenge, actually. Yeah, and so, but I also see a lot of like libertarians, and so you could see like a modern liberal, I guess, at least for the United States, that terminology really works, and then like libertarians and stuff. Like I see them both really connect to like Sword and Sorcery and write it, and they both kind of suck sometimes, and they both make really good stories sometimes. So I mean, like,
yeah, I think there's something like that's why I said, like earlier, I said like Conan is basically Nietzsche in loincloth. Is that, like, once again, like someone, Nietzsche's writings also appeal to a lot of weird people. Then you can argue whether they actually understand what it's about or not. But I think, yeah, this idea of the individual versus a system is something that speaks to a lot of us. The question is then what you define as the system and how you do that. And there's danger, because the analysis that we as individuals face some uncaring systems that we probably built up ourselves as humans. So far, the analysis is fairly, it's understandable. The question is like where you move on from there, and the consequences you take from there, and the lessons you take from there. And I think that's where Conan, as the individualist power fantasy, kind of works so well for especially a more libertarian right-wing kind of thing, which is interesting, because while Conan certainly does go and kill whatever is in his way, Conan is not the guy who leaves people behind. He's not that guy, right? Which is exactly where it kind of breaks down, because Conan might be an individualist when it comes to his general beliefs, but he's also not a dickhead who just leaves people to die if he can.
You're right. Yeah, it's got this common thing of stick it to the man type thing, and then but you're right though. Conan is I don't know. It's funny that like you can get so much from him.
Yeah, but once again, I mean, it kind of makes sense, because Howard writes in exactly the Great Depression, beginning of the New Deal and so forth kind of time, where these things are on the line, right? This is the same time people talk about grapes of wrath and whatnot. It is that time where I feel the harm that these more or less incomprehensible abstract systems cause become, like, it's a Great Depression. It does lead to all these weird things, which is why it leads to the rise of fascism on the one hand, but it also drives a lot of people into a more like leftist, socialist, whatever analysis of the world. But I think it's very much why cosmic horror is sort of the horror system of the 20th century that works so well, because it's humanity versus uncaring, cold systems is at the core of it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's very modern, I'd say. That, and it says over here it's individualist primitivist, and like, yeah, you see, it's what's interesting is that you can see individualist stuff and primitivist stuff in Romanticism as well, but also carrying over into modernism, and which is interesting.
I think when one thing that I find interesting when people talk about Conan as the primitivist and so forth, but there's
Mhm.
these letters from Howard when he talks about like how it sucks to be a barbarian. It's like, yeah, like it's a power fantasy, but Robert E. Howard was aware of the fact that being a barbarian is kind of shitty.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not just like be like Conan.
Right. Yeah.
It's like be like Conan, but also try to not be a barbarian because you might still want to live in, civilization.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's a lot of nuance, right, to just fantasy in general, right? If that
Mhm.
wasn't already obvious. Like you get it in Dunsany too, who's
Mhm.
around the same time. Well, I guess contemporary, even.
Yeah, true. John, I'm not sure what you mean with your hay because I've no idea. Maybe I missed something you said earlier that explains your indignation. Oh yeah, yeah. The first Conan story is Conan updating the maps in the Imperial Library and being bored.
Very, very true. He also mourns the death of a poet, I believe, right? And
Yes,
Phoenix on a Sword. So
I think that's like probably the most Nietzschean thing in Conan is Conan mourning the death of the poet. I keep forgetting his name because his name changes between the Kull story and the Conan story.
yeah, I don't remember it.
God, what's his name? Anyway, and a pseudo Italian name, but like it's Conan mourning like the death of tragedy. Like, it's very birth of tragedy. Conan Howard channeling his inner Nietzsche, I think. And I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that Robert E. Howard, did read some Nietzsche at some point. I'd be surprised if he hadn't.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I don't.
Oh yeah, yeah. You're right, John. He does become the man,
He does, yeah.
and he's not happy about it. I think that's like one of the interesting parts where Conan is like, yeah, the system sucks, and he fights his way up there to stop the system, and then they just like make him boss, and he's like, oh shit, I'm stuck now because I've got responsibilities for once. And I think that might be probably the one thing that actually makes Conan not libertarian in a huge way. Is that whenever Conan has responsibility for people, he does actually take those responsibilities very seriously.
Yeah, that's true. That is yeah. Huh.
Which I guess are the parts that the rugged individualist Conan fans kind of sometimes ignore because, yeah, Conan is an individualist in a way, but he's aware of the responsibilities that he gets through becoming an individualist.
Mm-hmm.
And he pays his dues. Like when people help him in, say, the Scarlet Citadel or whatever, he does actually go and help them back and keep his promises.
It's true. Conan the good guy. No, actually, I saw a lecture Jason Ray Carney gave. I don't remember, a few years ago. His title for his lecture was called Conan the Compassionate. So.
Yeah, religious freedom. Wow, that's true. But I think that's actually part of it, and I think that's one of those aspects that are part of existentialism in a lot of ways as well. Is that it is about that individual compassion? Because how do you fight that? How do you fight the coldness of abstract of the uncaring universe? You fight it by caring and by actually being emotional and by sharing
Mm-hmm.
emotions. That's the way to fight it, because the system don't care about you. It's what makes us human is that we stay compassionate, and Conan definitely is compassionate in that regard.
Yeah, that's true. That's very interesting. Like, because it's just not, he's not the dumb barbarian that everyone. He's got his stains going on for sure, but so,
True.
but he's not just he's not a meathead, I guess you could say.
That's true. No, he's not a meathead, or not always a meathead.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
I still love, like, I think like my favorite Conan opening is the beginning of Queen of the Black Coast. That is just like one of the best openings to a short story or novella, or whatever you want to call it, that I've ever read. Is like Conan just riding down from the city and just jumping on the ship that is leaving, and then explaining why the watch is chasing him.
Yeah, man. Oof.
That's just like so masterfully done.
Yeah, I know that, and that's probably why that one's a favorite for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, besides Baylet throwing off her clothes at one point, I guess.
Yeah, that's probably also a reason. Let's not ignore that part.
Yeah, we're just gonna be honest about it. It's funny, man. They don't make fantasy covers like that anymore.
Not really, no. What a shame.
What a shame. Yeah, actually, I just got a copy of Burroughs's Thuvia Made of Mars, the Michael Whalen one, and in the original version, Michael Whalen's version, she's not wearing any clothes, right? Lore accurate, but she's facing away, like from the camera, so to speak, right? And so it's fine, you know, you just see your butt, see some side boob or whatever, and the publishers weren't okay with that, so they made her like they made him add a G-string, which is like doesn't do anything, like obviously, so it's just like kind of funny, but whatever.
Yeah, but like, yeah, that makes no sense whatsoever. Like, I mean, I get it. I get it. It's like, yeah, you don't want to just put out, you know, pornography, basically. And there's certainly arguments to be had about, you know, the male gaze being very important for love, sword and sorcery. Adding a G-string doesn't do anything.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, oof. Sex sells, huh?
The number one thing on Mars is definitely wearing G-strings.
Man, you gotta love Burroughs for his progressive nakedness.
That might just be the only progressive thing about it.
Yeah, probably.
It's only female nakedness, isn't it?
I think I'll like. Is it? I don't. Yeah, you see. Well, I've seen a ton of art with John Carter wearing clothes, but I'm not sure he does either in the stories. He has straps on, you know, like on his chest and like stuff that. I don't know. Yeah, is he naked? I don't know. Maybe he's not. Maybe it is just female nakedness.
I just assume it is, because I mean he gets transported from Earth to Mars, and he still has his officer's uniform or whatever he's wearing, and obviously he'll probably never wash it on Mars, I assume.
Yeah,
it might get very, very faded at some point.
Yeah,
threadbare even.
Right.
But I assume while you could get away with naked or G-string wearing Maid of Mars, you probably couldn't get away with a G-string wearing John Carter on the cover.
I'd like to see that now.
It will be like, yeah, I think it's one of those aspects when we talk about fantasy and sword and sorcery. It's like there is very much like a level of sexism there when it comes to portrayal of characters and stuff like that is certainly a part, and it is still very much marketed in a lot of cases. It is very much marketed to a male gaze, I think.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's interesting, like, because it's, how do I say this? Like, I think of like the original cover for Black Amazon of Mars, you know, which doesn't have, wow, I'm forgetting her name. Whatever her name is, the Black Amazon of Mars, whatever her name is. She's not wearing nothing, you know. She's actually in kind of okay, look, she's kind of in lore accurate armor. She's wearing armor, right? It covers everything, but she's obviously a woman in the armor.
Yeah.
And in the story, she's not. You know what I mean? She's very not obviously a woman. I mean, the bigger problem I'd say actually with that original cover is it has Eric John Stark be a white guy. When he's not, but whatever. That's another problem, I guess. And so it's like the 2019 version of that book, though, is better, at least on the cover, besides the fact that it looks kind of anime-ish, which I'm not a huge fan of. But it's very, I don't know, what's the word? And like androgynous looking armor. It just looks like armor. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And then Eric John Stark's the right color on the cover as well. So.
That's like another part, like the implicit racism. I mean, I guess you're
Mhm.
aware of that part, like when Ursula Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea came out for the first time, and they made like they made Geth white, and she's like, "Look, it's in the text. It's in the text. He's copper skinned." Everyone is like, and she had to fight for that to actually get him the right color.
That's so ridiculous. Yeah. But I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I guess it's ridiculous
No,
still.
I think it's one of those things that are also difficult to grapple with. It's like, yes, so much of like the stuff we love comes from a very specific, like very sexist, racist, fairly conservative background in that regard.
The past is always
It's
conservative
still
by
like,
that extent.
I'm using conservative in a very
Yeah.
specific way here. It's like,
Yeah, I know.
yeah, and it comes from that background, but there's still something that speaks to us, even though we are aware of these, the flaws of it. um, and the question, the whole struggle of like, how can you like these and enjoy these things without, without diminishing the fact that yes, there's some very these stories are written and especially marketed in a way that deliberately excluded a lot of people, because
Yeah.
while the story may speak to a lot of people, the marketing certainly made it very clear who was supposed to read these stories and who was not.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's true. Sadly, in some sense, it's funny. Marketing is a very funny thing. It's I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's part of like how marketing does even frame the thing in a very specific way that the story doesn't necessarily actually have.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And it sometimes it can be really like a gross mistake, you could even say. Sometimes it's just silly. I did not hear anyone mention the Bocalane and Corbel Brooch novellas. No one ever recommended them to me. Okay, I found out by myself what they were, because no one ever said they were Sword Sorcery, and it's like, yeah, dude, I would put the label on them personally. You could put it with a caveat, of course, if you want.
Yeah.
And so it's like, but like, for example, I've never heard, I don't think, or no, only recently is the first time I heard Philip Chase say the word sword and sorcery. And so it's just like, and that's where I largely watched the video. It's the same thing with Dying Earth as a subgenre. I don't know if he knows it exists. But
let's just say that Dr. Fantasy does have a focus on fantasy.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. I'm not. I love Philip. I'm not like trying to like hate on him. I was just like,
no.
To me,
but
like,
I agree what you mean.
I agree.
Well,
I like to be as accurate as possible, as to be as like, I guess you could say inclusive, but I mean like just to be like completely accurate as possible, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, in Bocalane and Corbel Brooch seems like an homage to Liber, and kind of the idea of sorcerers as evil, as well. In Sword and Sorcery, and any video I watched on YouTube before I ever read them never mentioned that. Not any of that. You know what I mean? Like, literally none. And so it's just like, I heard the market as absurd, which is accurate. You know what I mean? Like, and stuff like that. But it's just like, that's just like, what? Oh, come on, guys. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I had to hear about it from someone in the Whetstone Discord server who mentioned that they were like the Sword and Sorcery of the Malazan. I was like, what? I didn't know these existed. Why did no one tell me? So.
Well, they're the one thing in Malazan that I haven't read, so I couldn't tell you.
Okay, well, they're good if you ever do get that chance. They're
I would have to steal. I would have to steal the ebooks somewhere. Because it's very difficult to make ebooks accessible to a screen reader, and there's no audiobooks, so it would have to involve some sword and sorcery, something that Fafford and the Grey Mouser would probably approve of. Is my point.
Yeah. I can always my dad always plays with like AI like audio
Mhm.
book type things, like making it sound better than just what the normal reader sounds like, I guess. He's still
Yeah.
trying on that one. So but yeah, no, they're good stories, and
Yeah, no.
but I mean, like even in the last one I read, I just read the Leaves of Laughter's End, which is the third one, and in the introduction by the guy was like, he was basically saying some crap about like, oh, a lot of people like, oh, I wasn't sure like fantasy could be done in short form. I was like, well, you obviously haven't read very much fantasy. Like what the hell was
Yeah.
that kind of comment? Like, you just made me not care about any of the rest of your words, dude. Like, I'm skipping the rest of this intro. so, so, I mean,
Yeah, that's one of the things that annoys me so much about like so much of like book, let's call them book fluencers in general, right? That so much is focused so heavily on contemporary stuff that is happening right now that the number of people that have some sort of background in, where the genre comes from, what happened before, is yeah, it's minuscule, to
yeah,
put it
no,
mildly.
it's embarrassingly bad sometimes, and it's really not embarrassing, I guess. Like, I hate ignorance, if that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
the internet is a very powerful tool,
Yes, I
and
know.
like if I have a question, I'm gonna look it up my freaking self. I had this one class where I was supposed to come with a question every day, and I almost never had a question because if I had a question while I was doing the assignment, I figured it out. I don't need the teacher to tell me. Like, what the hell is the point of that? So,
Yeah.
and so yeah. Anyways, I have to use the restroom real quick, but I have a story kind of related to that. But I will be right back.
All right,
That's
you
fine.
do
Sorry
that.
about that.
I'm looking forward to that.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Let's take the time while Liam's away. Um, glad there's still people here, although it's very few people today, and you're very quiet today compared to the last couple of times. Maybe it's the summer, maybe it's because we're really boring, which is both fair, I guess. um, what do you mean by awkward, Joe? That no one's there, and you have to talk to me. I have to tell you, Joe, Simone de Beauvoir called herself a Marxist, and she did certainly not have as much facial hair as Marx or me. Hair is not necessarily, what do you mean? Hair is not necessarily, it's not mandatory for being Marxist. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's a summer thing, and no one's here, and we'll talk about the story, and then we'll probably slowly end it after that. Yeah,
Right.
we're getting close to the 2 hour mark anyway. So, well, Liam, as a writer, as a storyteller, tell us a story.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure
Also,
if I'm
you,
that
you
good.
you can defend yourself against the allegation of having not enough facial hair to be a Marxist.
Okay. Well, I mean, that seems fair enough to me, actually. No, I don't have enough facial hair. Actually, funnily enough, my school I just graduated from wouldn't let us have facial hair except for mustaches. Um,
Wow.
it was it was BYU. Okay, so it is Mormon school. Okay, and they have this really outdated honor code that involves dress and grooming. And so my facial hair right now is not long at all, but it's the longest it's been since I started going to school at BYU. BYU is really cheap, guys. I can recommend cheap schools. um, so um, and so I was like, pay a ton of money and wear whatever the hell I want, or pay like no money and have to follow the silly little honor code for a little bit. I was actually at BYU Idaho, so I didn't take Sanderson's class, Joe. But anyways, this story I actually had a couple
Yeah,
because
did
I thought of
you
one.
take
I was there.
Sanderson's class? Is what Joe asked.
Yeah, I didn't because there's three BYU's actually. Um, there's one in Utah, one in Idaho, and one in Hawaii. And so I was in Idaho, um, which is just actually has a nicer campus. If I'm just being completely honest, it has less as far as classes go, but it had what I wanted as well. So, but yeah. Anyways, Story time, I guess, real quick. I
Yeah.
thought of another story when I was using the restroom, but I had this
All right.
guy. I felt bad about this, kind of, okay, and I wasn't trying to be mean to this guy, but it was just happened this week. I don't know if anyone saw it in Mike's Discord server. I never watch Mike's videos, but I'm in a server pretty often.
After I got kind of heated about him like two videos ago, live streams ago, I decided it might be smart for me to leave his Discord because I felt like I can call him that many names, but it feels more honest to not hang out in his Discord to share my videos.
I mean, that's
if
fair.
I call him names.
That's fair. I never talked to him on his Discord server, and like I said, I don't watch his videos, but
Yo,
to
also,
me, yeah, what's up, Oso? To me, it's, I know I'm getting sidetracked, but to me, it's not really like I don't watch his videos, and it's because I can't stand his voice. Okay, it's just, that's one of those
Totally
for
get
me. I just
Yeah.
cannot stand it. So I just don't watch him. So I can't really comment on his content. But
It's bad.
okay, I'll take your word.
Trust me, he loves Conan, but he loves Conan for all the reasons that he shouldn't love Conan.
Huh. Interesting. Okay. Anyways, story time. I was on Mike's server. I was in like, what are you reading? Like channel or whatever. And someone said, I finished Wheel of Time, and I'm like, I want to take a break from Sword and Sorcery. And I was thinking stuff like this. And I was just like, how do you finish Wheel of Time and want to break from Sword and Sorcery? Because it didn't make sense to me. I was like, maybe I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was reading Sword and Sorcery in between Wheel of Time or something. And he responds, and he's just like, because I've read a lot of it recently. If you're not going to be helpful, don't respond at all. I was like, okay, well, I mean, like, here's what Sword and Sorcery is. And I was like, I'm not trying to be like annoying, but like, there's a lot of people who don't know what Sword and Sorcery is. And I will admit, there's a lot of people who don't know what Sword and Sorcery is and post what it is online, and they're wrong. You know what I mean? A lot of people think it's fantasy in general, but it'd make it a redundant label if it was just fantasy. Yeah. And so I basically told him, like, oh, this is what Sword and Sorcery is. Here's all the classic examples, blah, blah, blah. If you want some recent recommendations, I can give those to you too. He left the server. So I was like, okay.
Liam doing the Lord's work there.
I just felt like a pedant, and I do feel like a pedant sometimes, and but it was like, I wasn't trying to be mean to the guy. It was just kind of funny that like I like have this need to be, not that I need to be right, but that someone needs to know the truth, if that makes sense. Like, it's like, okay, obviously you don't know what Sword and Sorcery is, so like here you go, like, here's what Sword and Sorcery is. And I did something like this. This is so out of character. Here's like my second story. So out of character. I went to the Life, the Universe, and Everything writing conference. It's academic writing conference technically.
Nice.
So it's discounted for students. And but
see what
that was,
did there.
Yeah, see, that's in Utah. It's not on the Utah like Provo BYU campus, but it used to be. That's where it started, like 40 years ago. And Brandon Sanderson didn't actually go this year, but he often goes. In fact, that's a whole other conversation about all the Utah writers that didn't show up. But anyways, there is a panel on pulp, like fiction, just fantasy in general. And I know all of the guys on the panel. Okay. I know them all. I've read but 2 of their books. I have the third guy's book, but I haven't read it yet. And in fact, I was staying at one of the guys' house while in Utah. And so this is why I was probably comfortable doing this, because someone asked a question about like women in pulp, and they gave examples, and I don't remember what their examples were. I think they were largely comic books, like examples, like old school comic books. And I'm not one of those people that thinks all guys suck at writing women, but it definitely helps if you're a woman. I feel like to write women. And so
very true.
Someone asked that question, and then someone also asked, I think, like, what is Sword and Sorcery? And their answer didn't satisfy me enough. So I raised my hand in the crowd, and I was like, they call on me. And I was like, not to put myself behind that table, But I'm going to answer your questions for you, basically. And so, like, I talk really loud, which I'm really quiet normally, and I answer both those people questions, basically. I was like, here's what Sword and Sorcery is. Don't look it up online. I think that was what the thing that actually got them. Yeah, they're like, oh, you can just look it up online. I was like, don't look it up online because it's wrong half the time. And then, so here's what it is. And then I think I recommended like Lee Brackett and CL Moore and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because the panel didn't recommend either of those.
Yeah, of course not.
And then I felt so bad about it though, because I was like, what the hell? Like that's the type of person like I would get really frustrated with if I was on the panel. But like I said, I knew all of them. They were okay with it. At least they said they were okay with it afterwards. So,
yeah. I love Oso's definition of sword and sorcery. It's funny about Byron stabs a sorcerer with a sword. I'm like, yeah.
Not really wrong there. Not really wrong.
It's a very good working definition, I guess.
Yeah.
A working definition of pulp, though.
I mean, quite literally, it's stuff that was written in pulps. Yeah, like Oso says, pulp is a type of paper. That's not normally what people, I guess, mean though when they say they write pulp fantasy these days.
Yeah. I think like with pulp, once again, I think it kind of comes down to let me pull my Adorno on you. It's very much a product of the culture industry. It's something that's supposed to entertain and recharge people's batteries so they can go back and work in the system the next day, which means it has to follow very specific rules. It has to be very, formalized, schematic, give the hero something of a success at the end, but not too much of a success because you have to come back for the next installment the next time round. And I think that's part of what makes pulp. It can go over the top in a lot of ways, but it should never actually challenge or change the status quo, because on the one hand, you need to tell the next story in the same universe, and you don't want people to actually think about the fact that they could maybe change the system.
Yeah, that's probably a good definition. I see some people on Twitter, that hellhole that I get on for some reason, and a lot of people who advertise themselves as pulp writers today are basically just saying they don't want stuff that's woke in quotation marks in their stories. So that's how a lot, I think, would say it, at least the people who label themselves as pulp.
Well, yeah, you're right, Rox. The orange juice example might be workable for things that are not about books. I mean, the idea with pulp from there comes from the fact that it's like the very cheap paper quality. So it's about like something that you can. It's a quick fix, I guess.
Yeah, you read it and you throw it away. That's what happens.
It's the crack cocaine of fantasy literature. The rich kids up there get to read their Tolkiens and stuff, and us as peons down here have to deal with what you can get. Right. Which is kind of wrong, but you get my meaning.
I mean, it's kind of like it's a complicated thing, right? I mean, like Oso says, it's kind of more of a time period in speculative fiction.
Yes,
that's pretty accurate. Yeah, I mean, it's like basically from the you could go earlier than this, but the 20s to like
early, like after World War II, I think it kind of took a dive.
Yeah, and you'd still have magazines, but even I think if you were being pedantic about it, they wouldn't be pulp magazines.
Yeah.
So, but I have a couple pulp magazines actually.
Yeah. I think the other part is like once like color printing became so cheap that people could just switch to comic books. The pulp story magazines kind of faded away, and people decided to just sell books because books sound like more value for your money when you have like 200 pages instead of like 150 or 1,500 pages because it says Brandon Sanderson. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And suddenly quantity becomes more important than quality.
Yeah. I don't don't understand that. Anyway, I still don't understand those people who like read big books just because they're big, like type of thing.
Yeah, I think it does certainly have, it is very much a nostalgic specific style when you want to call it pulp, especially, your boxing stories and your racist detectives killing Chinese people in California stories and stuff like that. It is very much part of the pulps in a way.
Yeah. I mean, the cool thing about pulps, though, is that they were kind of out there, though, in a lot of ways, which is, I think, one of the things that people do like about it still today. You know what I mean? Like, is they're just like, they're pretty wild sometimes. So, I mean, like...
Yeah, but I think that's on the other hand, that's the other part. Is like you had to, because there's like... because of the competition, you had to be a bit out there to attract readers, because there's a very, very specific competition that is like, there's like 10 magazines on a stand in a shop, and you have to be the one with the Stygian whipping the Brithulian girl or whatever.
Yes.
And that does lead to escalating stuff in a way that, say, horror novels or horror stories did sort of add more and more gore and brutality or violence near like the end of the 80s. And there's always a level to which you can take that before it kind of collapses. And I think that also happened in a way with the pulps at some point, when he kind of collapsed in a way.
Yeah.
And Grimdark might just go the same way at some point.
Grimdark.
The Solomon Kane question. So here's the thing. I would love to talk about Solomon Kane in some detail, but in that case, I need Liam to be the entertainer for like 2 minutes so I can run and go to the bathroom for a second.
Oh, okay.
Tell some more stories about your time at the Life, the Universe and Everything convention. Was it Life, the Universe? Is it like a deliberate Douglas Adams reference? Or
yeah, that's very deliberate. Yeah.
Very good. You tell another story. I'll be back in a second. Then we'll talk about Solomon Kane.
Okay.
Because I got thoughts.
Okay. I'm interested to hear his thoughts, because I have embarrassingly not like really read any Solomon Kane. No, I don't think I have read any. So yeah, no, I guess I don't really have much more stories to say, but I can try to entertain you guys while you're gone. You know, who's a really good entertainer while like the host is gone? I had Ed Greenwood on my channel last year, and he just told this wild story about his neighbor's lawnmower exploding when he drove over a log. Anyways, so Ed Greenwood's good to have on your channel if you ever make channels or have a channel. He's just a funny guy. But no, the cons, I've only ever been to 3, actually. So I went to FanX last year. They're all in Utah. So I live in Idaho, and in like the part of Idaho where no one else lives, I guess. And Life Universe and Everything, which is a writing conference. So that one had the more panels on it probably than FanX, which FanX is like a Comic-Con. Then I went to Writer's Cantina, which was very tiny. And that was just a couple weeks ago. But yeah, the Life Universe and Everything was like... The weird thing though about it actually is that there were so many people that weren't there. So Brandon Sanderson wasn't there. Ellie Modisette wasn't there. He lives in Utah. Tracy Hickman wasn't there. Brian Lee Durfee wasn't there. Larry Correa wasn't there. Who else wasn't there? Basically, like the biggest writers in Utah weren't there, essentially, right? Peter Arulian, I don't think he's big, but he wasn't there, I think. And then, yeah, the person, I think the biggest author I met while I was at LTUE was probably Dan Wells, he's like best buddies with Brandon Sanderson. I met him and had like a conversation with him. It was kind of weird. So I imagine Korea not being there as a bonus. It's funny because you say that, because he's very out there online. And I don't know if I don't really appreciate that from like a lot of people, regardless of where your political spectrum ideas are. Korea himself, I have had very little interaction with him because he's always swarmed by fans. Yeah, welcome back. Yeah.
You talked about exploding lawnmowers?
Yes.
So here's the trick. I just walked past my flatmate's room, and he told me that there's some technical issue with the chat because some of his comments don't come through. And he told me that you talked about exploding lawnmowers.
Yes, I did. Yeah, I was saying how a good guest to have on when I had Ed Greenwood on last year and I had to use the restroom. He just told this random story about exploding lawnmowers. So,
I appreciate that you just take Ed Greenwood's story and put one Inception layer on it.
Yeah. Ed Greenwood is such a wild guy. His birthday was yesterday, actually. But
wow, how old is he now?
He's not that old, actually. He's like in his 60s, I think.
Okay.
He created Forgotten Realms when he was like 7.
Wow.
And he started working for TSR, or he never was an employee of TSR, but he started like writing for Dragon when he was like 18. So
that explains it.
Mm-hmm. Because it's an empty wasteland. I mean, that's not completely wrong.
Yeah, I think that's like the same thing why there's so many metal bands in Finland, because they got nothing to do for like half a year.
Yeah, man. No, Utah is there are a lot of writers out of Utah, though. It is kind of interesting. Steve Diamond's also there. DJ Butler, Joe Monson, Carrie English. There's a ton. I already mentioned all the popular ones while you were gone.
I think part of it is, in fact, that BIU does have this the course that Sanderson is teaching now, and that the Rune Lord guy was teaching before.
Yeah, David Farland.
David Farland, that's the name. Yeah, I think part of that is exactly that, because while it does teach you how to write, it also gives you an enormous boost when it comes to actually getting published because of networking, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I could see that. I think Farland's a better writer than Sanderson, personally. But yeah,
that's so much the point. Like, I mean, I watched Sanderson's lessons, like his lectures on writing and stuff. Like, they're not bad and everything.
No.
I think the point is exactly that you get hooked up with people that might actually publish you. That it gives you a leg up if you're at that course. So I think that helps.
Yeah.
But about Solomon Kane. So here's my view on Solomon Kane. I think the Solomon Kane stories are some of Howard's best stories. Unfortunately, they're also some of his most racist stories ever. I do love Kane as a character, because of like all the inconsistencies that are way more explicit there than they are in other stories, where Howard does make it explicit that his character, Kane is like this Puritan, but he does all these other things that are going completely against his faith. and Howard explicitly writes into those stories that Kane is aware of the fact that they go against his faith, but he kind of ignores that, and Howard writes that explicitly there. So there's some of his most self-aware stories, but the level of racism is just insane in some of those stories. I mean, I'm fine with like having the French guy called Leloup be the bad guy. I'm totally good with that. But there's some like that are somewhere in Africa that are just insanely racist.
Yeah, and those are all historical, right? And so then that's kind of like it's more blatant, like a lot of his Conan stuff. But I haven't read Solomon Kane. I should caveat that I haven't read any of it yet, actually. So
I think, as I said, like some of those are really good. There's this one like very interesting like horror one that's set in Germany, I guess, when they come to this weird like tavern in the Black Forest, and it's more like a very closed-in horror kind of thing. Like the travelers come to this hostelry tavern kind of thing and stay overnight, and turns out everyone is a bad guy, and Solomon Kane just walks away from a burning house at the end. Which works well because it's a bunch of white guys that get killed by being stupid assholes, which I'm fine with. The Dark Continent part, you're right, Roxy. That's I don't know, man. Mike, you're right. He was pals with Lovecraft, but I feel like so. Here's the thing: like all of these like writers did have like their very specific like uh, weird phobias. For Howard, for Lovecraft, it's fish monsters and tentacles, and a lot of racism when it comes either to black people and to because Lovecraft is a fucking eugenicist and he really hates miscegenation. Is that how you pronounce it? But you know what I mean. He he's very much a purity guy, to put it mildly. And on the other hand, Howard is more racist towards Chinese people in his stories. Like his evil is more in the east. Maybe I have no idea why, and he's more against serpents, like snakes and big monkeys. Clark Ashton Smith has more of like an insect and invertebrate kind of issue. But there's very little racism, like explicit racism, in Clark Ashton Smith. It's you know not as much as with Howard and Lovecraft, but I think that's they all have their very unique fears, and the dark continent part with Howard, I don't know. It's like his vision of Africa is so weirdly combined between like, is he racist or is he trying to build up the image of Africa that people in the 17th century had? And I don't know what he's doing there, what he's going for, because it's kind of difficult to judge. And as it turns out, the author is dead.
Really, man.
I just like there's like one of those fragments, like a King Cole fragment that I always find really interesting for Howard, where there's Cole and one of the Velusian guys, and I guess it's Brule the Spear Slayer, who's his picked, but your pre Conan picked kind of thing, and it's got like all these different guys, and they're sitting there and they're playing some sort of card game or board game or whatever, and he talks about like how they're all different, races, because he's Howard and he used the word race in all kinds of weird ways. Like they're all different races, but what actually unites all of them is their like individual spirit and so forth. And it's like, yeah, wait, I don't want to, call it like anti-racist or whatever, but it shows that Howard has a very nuanced way where it's like, or a more individualist take on things, where it's like, yeah, skin color is not exactly what makes you a good or bad person. It's more like your individual spirit. Now, once again, he does have a lot of like racist ideas in there. When you read something like Whale of Lost Women, yeah, it's there. But it's different from what Lovecraft does. But Lovecraft is. Yeah, I don't know. Let's not go there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I when we I was in a class, a literary criticism class, and some. Yeah, I want to say kid, because I've probably got like 8 years on him or something. But he made his comment about like how he just mentioned Lovecraft in like reference to like whatever the heck we were discussing in class, and he had to stop and like apologize profusely for Lovecraft's racism. I was like, don't feel the need to do that. Like, I don't get it. Like I personally, when I hear someone likes Lovecraft, I'm like thinking, oh, that this person must be a racist because they like Lovecraft, but.
Well, just to be sure here, Robert E. Howard might be dead, but he's also very much immortal.
He's a martyr.
Yeah, the whole Robert E. Howard thing is incredibly sad, and I think what's so tragic about it, and that's like an interesting aspect, is like that trope of the martyred genius, and that you need to suffer to actually produce great art. And it's something that I hate, because it does glorify suffering in a way that I don't want to. But it does certainly. You can tell that reading Howard's stories, no matter which ones you read, you can tell that guy is not happy, and it does kind of connect to a lot of people, because it turns out a lot of us aren't always really happy, and that speaks to a lot of readers in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it sucks he died so young, but
Here's one final thing that I really wanted to, look at that I find really interesting is like because Howard turned towards Western stories after a while, right? More and more into like because he wanted to talk about Texas and stuff. And I find it interesting because I feel like so much of like his stories in general, and a lot of sword and sorcery stories are very close to your classic Western stories in a lot of ways because the classic Western is very much about this conflict between civilization and the wild or nature or whatever you want to call it, right? And I think there's a connection there that makes sword and sorcery in a way just like D&D games, which can be seen, a lot of D&D can be seen as following the same kind of rule where you are the people of civilization bringing order to the chaos of the wilds. In a way it does follow that same kind of dichotomy between the wild and chaos and order, or civilization and the wild, or whatever you want to call it. I think there's an interesting aspect there that those two systems are very much embedded in what makes sword and sorcery work.
Yeah, it's interesting that yeah, I mean, because you don't really see that, so I'd say in epic fantasy,
No.
right? But I think it's very much because Howard liked to read westerns, that you kind of get this idea from. But he also liked historical adventure stuff, I guess, too.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that like conflict of chaos and order, and maybe that's part of where the issue is. That like Conan is not by like a lot of sword and sorcery heroes, while enjoying civilization, are not by definition on the side of civilization, whereas the heroes of epic fantasy are defending order and civilization against chaos and darkness.
Yeah. That's like some Roman thing or something.
Like you never know. With Conan is chaos. He might like to hang out in places where he can actually drink wine out of flagons, but at the end of the day, he's not going to sit at home and smoke a pipe and curling up his hairy toes. That's not what's happening. And
yeah,
and I think that's part of where the difference is between if you define fantasy as a conflict between chaos and order, epic fantasy is very much about the defense of order against chaos, and sword and sorcery is very much about chaos fighting worse chaos to give civilization or give order a place to be, but it's always the outsiders. It's the people who are not part of order defending order. It's the outsiders.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wrote a story that's kind of like, I was deliberately playing with that, like, I guess you could say Western thing. It's like, it's how do I say this? I was mostly dealing with like the Linkmar stuff, right? Because Linkmar is this huge city. Oh, one sec, my kid is coming down there.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that's part of what I appreciate so much about like sword and sorcery is that it's not this good versus evil. It's like the people that are sort of evil defending good against evil, but they're outsiders, and so much of Westerns is also that the outlaw defending civilization. Someone has to. I guess it's sort of where Batman comes in as a hero, as a character as well. He's like the insult bad guy, and I think that's probably why so much of this stuff vibes with dudes.
Yeah. Anyways, like, sorry, my daughter walked in, but I was saying that I was kind of taking this like, they hang out in Linkmar a lot or whatever, but they do always go back out. They're like, oh, I need a break from this crap. And I was kind of switching that, right? I mean, because like, well, Linkmar's a huge like city, I guess, and that's kind of part of the problem, right? It's not. I mean, generally in a lot of fantasies, settlement itself is fine, and then there's just a big capital in the fantasy kingdom, right? So I was looking at it, I was like, oh, let me just make this like Stone Age like type of thing, essentially, because I was thinking about my anthropology classes I took, essentially. And so in this little story I wrote, the the main character is a hunter-gatherer, right? And then the bad guys are farmers. And so and they are in this like village basically, and he thinks that they are like based off like their permanence, which he sees as like unnatural, because humans should be like nomadic to an extent, he sees it that like these demons have like corrupted them type of thing, and so in the end his whole family ends up dying, and so he gets his revenge by killing everyone else basically, but so anyways.
Well, Britain, Howard did write more westerns near the end of his life, and we can assume that he would have written way more westerns if he had survived. And I don't think Black Company can count as Sword and Sorcery. It does certainly take a lot from it, but Black Company is a very unique, weird beast in what it does.
Black Company's awesome.
Also because the thing I kind of forgot to say, like when I walked past my flatmate's door, is like apparently he can't post stuff in the chat. So if there's more people of you who are trying to actually write stuff in the chat, and we don't get that, it seems to be a YouTube technical issue that I can't fix. I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to mention that it's like it's not your fault. I'm not ignoring anyone, is my point. But go back. I think when Stephen Erickson characterized Black Company as Vietnam fiction on peyote, I think he kind of hit the nail on the head there, because the Western is very much about individuals, and Black Company is very much about brotherhood, or brotherhood in a non-gendered way, because obviously it's more complicated. It's very much about having a community that stands up against whatever is going on. And I think that's a difference between the Western and the other thing, because you rarely have Western, like the way the Western is told is usually the rugged individual fighting against evil capitalists and natives at the same time, because we gotta hate the natives.
Yeah.
Which, you being one of the natives also, I'm aware that unless you can tell me there's like really good Westerns told from like a native perspective, which I would be really interested in. Is there something like that? Because that would be really interesting.
I'd be interested to hear what Oso thinks of like Witchy Eye, which is a epic fantasy by DJ Butler, but it takes place in 1815 America.
Okay.
So it's like alternate history fantasy type of thing. There's like a kind of like a Holy Roman Empire thing going on in most of America. And these electors in these like different towns. And there's like beastmen that live in like the Missouri type of thing. And but it does a good, at least the author does a decent job though of like including like all of like German and French, and I think is it Ojibwe, I think, as the natives we see the most of, for sure.
Yeah. There's like an interesting one that I found, which is very much trying to be like a fantasy taking some Western elements, is I think it's called The Incorruptibles by John Horner Jacobs. It's something I found because Richard K. Morgan talked about it on his blog when he was still talking about books that he liked and not about weird turfy stuff. And it's very interesting in that regard, because it's very deliberately about these people taking like basically a steamer up a river, and then there's natives attacking people, and turns out imperialism kind of sucks.
Really? Huh? That's crazy.
Yeah, I know. What a surprise, right? And obviously there's Red Country by Joe Abercrombie, which I didn't like that much, because I felt the way he did actually include, because he felt like he had to include some sort of like Native American stand-in kind of thing. And I think that was like the weakest point of the story.
Interesting. My thing with, again, like I said, when I read
Hmm.
the blade itself, because
Yeah.
I am going to ring. What the hell is the next one?
Master of Cold.
Is that
Oh
next
no,
one?
no! If you only read the blade itself, the next one
Yeah.
is
Is it Before They Are Hanged?
Before They're Hanged. Yes, and
Yeah.
Last
Okay.
Argument of Kings is the last one of that
Okay.
trilogy.
Yeah. I was gonna read Before They Are Hanged soon, and I remember in the first book, I was like, this is like actually pretty typical fantasy fare. As what it seemed like to me. Besides the fact that the characters are um a little different. So, but I'm interested to see where the heck it goes from there, I guess.
Yeah, I think like say here's the thing. Like I feel like the blade itself is basically Lord of the Rings, but if Gandalf was an actual manipulating dickhead. Also, let's dunk on Victorian England, which I'm fine with. I think it kind of breaks down once he actually talks about the Gurkish, which are a very Orientalist stereotype.
Mhm.
Which I'm aware that Abercrombie is not trying to make his Orientalist. He's trying, as far as I can tell, he's trying to build it like within that Union Victorian England kind of perspective, but it kind of breaks down because it's not clear that it is that perspective. It could just be him being very Orientalist and Islamophobic.
It's hard, and that's actually kind of the comment I said earlier, is that like a problem with a lot of this is back on the deconstruction thing, but like if you don't actually know
Yeah,
fantasy, then you can't write good fantasy either, and I feel like
yeah,
that's maybe a symptom of that as well. Like when you have this fantasy that comes from the Victorian period that is Orientalist, you know what I mean, and you're just like copying that basically and not thinking
yeah.
anything about it. So at least that's my thought.
Logan is Aragorn. Yeah, I can see that. Well, yeah, I feel like bias is basically what if Gandalf is actually the manipulating dickhead that we all kind of secretly think he might be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw you made a video on deconstruction, Britain. I haven't watched it yet, even though you actually tagged me in it. I'm just very slow with watching videos. So yeah, let's maybe kind of wind it down in a bit because we've been doing this for like over 2 hours now, and
Yeah.
I have like one other topic that I thought we might get to, but then we got slowed down and stuff, which I guess we'll just keep for the next time because there's always more to talk about. Yes, if you haven't subscribed to Liam yet, do that. He's over 800 subscribers. We can get him to 1,000. Which allows him to sell out by actually activate monetization.
Yes.
Which will give you nothing at all.
Right.
I can tell you, I got monetized in the beginning of January, and I've made all of 36 euros through
Oh
ads by
man.
now.
Yeah, I think.
And you get paid out after 50 euros. So
Oh really? Geez. Okay. That sounds about
it's super
right.
funny.
I have ads on my blog, and I think I've made like $5, and I'm not even sure what the payout amount is. So I'll probably never see the money. Is what I'm trying to say.
So Britain, I don't know what you mean by the structural anti-Semitism thing. I'm always willing to talk about that. Maybe not tonight, but I do have more ideas on that, and it'll happen at some point. I'm still working on it. I'm reading books on the subject as we speak. Also, I'm rereading Marx. Oh yeah, on the writing side of things, I have this dream where I'll write communist smut fantasy under the pseudonym of Sarah J. Marx. And I want to call it A Court of Surplus Value, and we'll see how that
Oh
goes.
my goodness. Oh my goodness, right? Did you see that thing about Sarah J. Maas's book today? Or I think
At which part, the thing that she's having like bonus chapters in different books?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the culture industry. The artwork is just the advertisement for the commodity. It's it's something we've seen in Adorno in like 1947. It's ridiculous. It's terrible. But it kind of shows you where that trend of publication and writing, not writing but producing entertainment, kind of goes.
Gosh,
It's ridiculous.
You know, it is. It's definitely ridiculous. You know, it's funny.
It certainly makes me angry.
Yeah, I saw that and I was like, I actually clicked on a Library of a Viking video and I was like, what am I doing? And I was like, screw this. I paused it after like 5 seconds and exited out of it. And I just went.
Wait, he was complaining about that, or he was happy?
Yeah, he was complaining about it.
He's reading Sarah J. Maas.
It was still sensationalist, so I had to click away. But
also, he's the one who talked about how he bought every individual like limited edition of Brandon Sanderson book. So I don't get it.
Yeah. I mean, I like myself.
That's what I would call hypocrisy.
Yeah. No, my biggest scene was okay. Look, this is probably not the place to complain. This is Liam's real feelings, I guess, that are coming out in a Rast live stream. It is the malcontents, I guess.
Yeah.
But I don't like how he calls himself a Viking. I just want to ask him, like, when was the last time you harried someone's coast, or like raped someone, or like stole some monk's like gold? I mean, like, what the heck?
he's a Christian guy from the Faroe Islands who went to England, and then instead of Lindisfarning the fucking place, he just started to study business administration.
Come on, that's not a Viking. That's not.
I've read Bengtsson. That's not how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, so that's like my complaint, like why I never even like would click on his videos to begin with. I was like, Library of a Viking, like, come on, that like a Library of a Pirate or something. Like, I mean, like,
I feel like the idea of like Library of a Viking would be like a pile of ashes and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. A Library of a Viking makes me cry. Okay, what about all we lost?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Now, I didn't see his video on the Sarah J. Maas thing, but I'm still working on that like Brandon Sanderson's culture industry thing, and I feel that the Sarah J. Maas individual chapters in different books, that's just like the next step. It's like bringing bonus tracks, CD and vinyl and tape bonus tracks, bringing that to publication. And because, you know, unlike music, where it's just like in a cover song or whatever, once you write about narratives, those chapters might actually be essential. You can't just leave that shit out. So,
yeah, right. It's like leaving the final chapter out of the book. Hey, $3.99 now for the last chapter.
Yeah. There's so much to be said about how that is like, well, a systematic problem that someone needs to address. But bringing torches and pitchforks to the publishing industry.
Yeah, gosh, man, I don't think I'll ever get. Well, I don't know if it gets worse. Yeah, I'll definitely go down that rabbit hole on my channel. I don't want to say I won't ever do that, I guess. But as of right now, I'm just killing my viewership by like posting like philology and poetry videos. So
I love that. I think we should have like more poetry stuff, especially because, and that's like one thing we didn't touch upon, is like how there's such a weird connection between the Sword and Sorcery writers. They're always trying to write poetry. Like Howard writes poetry, Clark Ashton Smith writes poetry, even H.P. Lovecraft writes poetry.
Yeah, it is kind of weird. And some of it, heck, I will stand by Smith being one of the best poets of the 20th century, in my opinion. That guy has some amazing freaking poems.
He might also be the guy in the Sword and Sorcery genre with the largest vocabulary out there.
Yeah, freak. I wouldn't be surprised at all, actually, if that was the case. It's ridiculous.
Which does help when you're a poet. Knowing words helps being a poet.
Yes, it does. No one. I mean, they don't. The reader might not know what the hell you're talking about, but I mean.
Well, Liam, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I feel it's slowly time to bring this to an end. And yeah, thanks everyone to actually for actually showing up and talking. If you tried to actually comment and it didn't work, it's not because I didn't ignore your stuff. It's because YouTube sucks. Or my flatmate is lying, which he'll probably tell me in a minute once I end this. So yeah, thanks. I'll be back in August is the next month, right?
Yeah, August is the
Yeah,
next
August is the next month. I'm pretty sure, and I'm pretty sure I'll come up with something cool. And go subscribe to Liam if you haven't. Go to his website, which is at Liam QV Hall.
QD Hall.
QD Hall.
Yeah, I tell people it's because I'm a
LiamQDHall.com.
cutie, you know.
Wait. You're not talking about that movie, right?
No, not the freaking movie, jeez. Just QD sounds like, you know, you're a
Yeah, I
cutie
know
or
what you mean.
something.
No, go to liamqdhall.com and read his stories and subscribe, and let's get him up to 1,000 subscribers so we can call him a sellout for actually getting advertisements on his videos.
Yeah, call me a sellout. Very good.
Yeah, for talking about sword sorcery stories from the 1930s that no one reads.
Right, exactly.
Irony is, as they say, the modus of the postmodern time. So you better get there. As I say, like, once again, thanks for actually showing up, Liam. Thanks everyone for watching. I appreciate it a lot. I had a lot of fun, and I'll see you in the next one. And until then, cheers.
Cheers.